small red neon lamp went out. Clams are small, round, soft, and tasty. The fan whirled its round blades softly. The line where the edges join was clean. Breathe deep and smell the piney air. It matters not if he reads these words or those. A brown leather bag hung from its strap. A toad and a frog are hard to tell apart. A white silk jacket goes with any shoes. A break in the dam almost caused a flood. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Passing Through podcast. This week's episode is a special one because I got to speak to the lovely Rachel Donald, host of the Planet Critical podcast, which you may have heard me recommend once or twice on this podcast. Rachel is a climate corruption journalist, and she investigates why the world is in crisis. Her podcast is incredible. She has brilliant guests. She herself is brilliant. And so this was a beautiful privilege for me to get to speak to her. I would have loved to keep speaking to her longer and picking her brain on a variety of topics, but some of the things that we talk about are helplessness in the face of what's happening in Gaza, violence, and how it kind of mediates all of what we experience. We talk about life and love and beauty and psychedelics and tech bros at Burning Man and a whole bunch of other things that you might enjoy. So I don't want to waste too much time up front with hype and meaningless preamble. I just wanted to fill you in on a little update. My partner Asha and I are going to have a unique opportunity where we will be working with permaculture legend Jeff Lawton on a sort of internship in Hungary, where we will be spending 6 weeks putting permaculture principles into practice and continuing this journey of getting our hands in the soil and reconnecting with nature and the earth around us. So I'm super excited for this opportunity. Only 15 applicants got accepted. So this is really a kind of once in a lifetime opportunity for us. So we're really excited and can't wait to learn all of these things from someone as knowledgeable as Jeff and the teachers of this training. So stay tuned for a little bit more about that when I have a solo episode. But I just wanted to fill you in and share something that I'm really happy and excited about. So more to come on that maybe next week. And let's just jump right in. Before I do that, you can find Rachel at planetcritical.com. You can find her podcast on Spotify and all of the places you listen to podcasts. You can find her on Instagram. You can find her everywhere. The eco tip for this week will be something that we talk about in this episode, which is this concept of ecodelics. If you are of sound mind and good health, and you aren't under any extreme emotional distress or disturbance, and you don't have any heart issues, you aren't on any medications, if you're feeling good and you're curious and you want to see what kind of doorways you could open and what kind of connections you might have to the energetic, spiritual, animist world around us, even if that's something as simple as smoking a little weed and putting on some good music and walking around in the forest, or walking around in the forest without the music and just hearing the natural beauty and ambience of the sounds around you, that might be a good way for you to reconnect with the awe and wonder and mystery of the earth. There's a quote that's been on my mind by Rachel Carson, and she wrote, "I believe that the more clearly we can focus our attention on the wonders and realities of the universe around us, the less taste we shall have for destruction." And I think that that quote really beautifully summarizes the theme. If there is a thematic core of our conversation, I think this is it. So, as always, be good to one another, and let's jump right in. Okay, Rachel Donald, welcome to the Passing Through podcast. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, I wanted to start with a little bit of a playful question because I listen to your podcast all the time, and you always open with a very powerful question.
Oh, no.
And every time you do it, I'm always wondering, I wonder what she would say if she was asked this question. And you know what the question is going to be?
I do, yeah.
Why is the planet in crisis?
Well, I have to begin with a caveat, which is that the answer that I give today would not be the answer that I would give yesterday or would give tomorrow. Um, every day we're getting more information, and every day, our emotional valence in relationship to the world is different. So that colors, our perspective. I think that the world is in crisis because of violence. We have a crisis of violence. And I think that crisis of violence is connected to our relationship with the world, our connection with the earth, and bleeds out into our connection with one another. There are some theorists that say, this sort of began with the agrarian revolution around 10,000 years ago when we first enslaved animals to do labor, or when we first demarcated parts of the land as belonging, as private, and thus created a distinction between ourselves and nature, which was then promulgated throughout history and deepened and worsened by certain traditions of thought, particularly in the Western tradition, like Plato's theory of eternal forms, that the earth was a profane place, and that there was an eternal realm where we were meant to exist forever perfectly. And I think that all of these ideas have merit. I think the reason that we can't solve the crisis is because of the level of complexity, because there is no easy way and there's no actually correct way to answer that question. And that's why I love asking it, because everybody gives a different answer. And I believe that all of the answers are equally valid and they all point to the big picture. And grasping that level of complexity is almost impossible. We might have big brains relative to the size of our bodies, but we're not that smart. And I like to think of complexity as, if you imagine seeing a sphere or a ball and how you can only ever see half of it at once. And you have to kind of like use your imagination or use your knowledge or use your faith or whatever it is to fill in the other side. And that's kind of what it's like when you're grappling with complexity. So yeah, it's a crisis of violence. It's a crisis of relationality, how we relate to one another, how we relate to the planet, how we relate to death and purpose.
Oh man, I'm so happy that you just said that there at the end, because there was a quote that I wanted to open with if I wasn't going to use this funny little question to try and see what your thoughts were. But I'm so happy I did, because this just segues really beautifully into this quote. And it says, at its core, even our spirituality is earth derived. The human and the earth are totally implicated, each in the other. If there is no spirituality in the earth, then there is no spirituality in ourselves. And that's by Thomas Berry. And I think this relationality that we've lost, this connection with the earth, this animistic kind of sensibility that we used to have for so much of human history, we've divorced ourselves from this. And that in itself is a violent act, as you're describing. And so yeah, like the death has been on my mind as well, because I've been maybe watching a little too much of what's going on in Gaza at the moment. Like this violence, this colonialism, this sense of separation, this othering, and all of this is really on display there. And I think in a way that other conflicts are not at the moment.
I think what's so shocking about what's happening in Gaza right now is, not just the extent of the brutality and cruelty and violence, but also the distinct lack of action on behalf of the international community. And in a sense, we, the people of the world, are fortunate that it so happens that these people can live stream what is happening to them, because it's the only way to get real information out of that illegally occupied territory. But I think it's also equally important to bear in mind that there are very similar acts of violence going on all around the world as well. In the Congo, in Sudan, in West Papua, this might be the genocide that is being live streamed the most, but it's not the only genocide that is occurring. And I think that speaks to the level of violence that we've become almost habituated to. And habituated to perhaps because it's out of sight, or habituated to because perhaps, it's what gives us in the global north, such a high quality of life, is extracting materials from the earth and labor from other populations and resources from places that do not belong to us. And so turning a blind eye is made possible by the seeming net benefit, I think. And what I'm grateful to the Palestinian people for is being brave enough in the midst of such destruction to continue to hold up a mirror to our own hypocrisies and to our own participation in violence. And yes, I wrote about the fact that one of the biggest gas fields in the world was found off the coast of Gaza. It was discovered in the early 90s, and how there has been this ongoing sort of relationship between the Palestinian, what was then the Palestinian Authority, and successive Israeli governments about who was going to have the right to develop that gas, and how essentially as left as you can be, wing Israeli governments were willing to allow the Palestinian Authority to develop the gas because it would provide them with a revenue stream, and how successive right-wing governments would kill the deal. And then eventually one went behind the back of the Palestinian Authority and renegotiated terms with the company that was going to explore the field, and then started to develop it, essentially. And how the UN, as early as sort of 2018, was writing reports about this gas field and saying it must be developed with the Palestinians. This is an opportunity for peace. This is an opportunity for economic ties, which are important when we're thinking about how to build relationships between seemingly ideologically disparate parties. But that advice obviously was ignored. And it's $500 billion worth. It's a huge amount of gas. And it would be more than enough to cover Israel's needs as well, because at the moment they're a net importer of gas. And equally, lots of companies have expressed interest in being involved in the development. And I think it was 12 new licenses were granted, in the couple of weeks after Israel first invaded Gaza. So it's part of my work is trying to highlight the continuing and continuous relationships between acts of violence and these like net benefits for states or corporations or entities, essentially. And how our way of life is built upon a foundation of violence. And also why, when thinking about transitioning to a new system, how do you uproot a system of violence if not with violence? Which is not a great idea, because we don't want more violence. How does violence respond to an act of trying to uproot it peacefully? These are the kind of complexity conundrums that, the walls that you eventually hit in your thinking that makes it very difficult to see a way to pass through, this moment of human history into an era of peace.
Yes. That same question has been, I mean, there's like three things I want to go to that you just said,
Go
but
for it.
that question that you just posed about what do we do? It's very complex. Peace doesn't seem to work. Violence doesn't seem to work. What are we left with at this point? And I don't have the answer. I don't think either of us have the answer to that question, but it's frustrating to feel like we're up against a wall when we just look around and see all of this. And the thing that you said about this kind of complicit feeling where the world is turning a blind eye and this is allowed to happen, these kinds of extractive, colonial, this violence that's perpetrated on not just people, but the planet. the role of journalism and reporters here, I think, is really crucial and really important, because I see videos of journalists and press on the ground in Gaza, and they're risking life and limb to raise awareness, to show people what's happening, to confront us with these uncomfortable feelings and let us see, so that it's harder to ignore. It's a way to kind of break that complicit feeling. And so I've been just really admiring journalists and the press, and feeling like really like, wow, like we like to put heroes in movies with capes and skin tight, colorful costumes on, but really the heroes, when you look around, are the people who are doing things like that, who are exposing corruption, who are talking about this, who are willing to risk their life to raise awareness.
I think there's an interesting relationship, though, between journalism and audience, and the fact that it must not be that our feelings of complicity diminish enough through engaging with scenes of violence so that we feel that just because we are educated, we are no longer accountable. Because I think that's a kind of problem that the left often bumps up against. Well, if I know a thing, that's the same as doing something about a thing.
Mm.
No, no, no. No, 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 no. Knowing a thing is learning enough so you know what to do about the thing. It's not enough to just know about the thing. And I think it kind of speaks to, the age of like petition protest that we've gotten to in the global north, particularly because it's becoming increasingly difficult to protest. I mean, they have really, really clamped down in many countries across Europe and the United States. Like, violence has been used against protest. Also, what really is a protest nowadays, if you can walk through the streets and still just be ignored.
Mm-hmm.
I am aware and acknowledge the fact that it is very difficult actually to design effective action, but engaging with stories, violent stories, should not assuage feelings of accountability. They should increase feelings of accountability. And I would actually love if anybody listening knows any sort of sociological study that has pointed to that and like done the data on that. I'd be really interested to know what the correlation is.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point, and I agree. And then part of me feels like, yes, but then what can we really do beyond speaking about it, beyond donating, beyond these protests that I agree feel kind of impotent at this point? Like they don't really seem to do anything. When the government can just come in with water cannons and pepper spray and just beat you in the street, or just incarcerate you, like you said, because they're, and in some places, people just get killed by governments and corporations for protesting to save the climate or whatever protest you're doing. It's actually really dangerous. So people feel like, okay, I could go out and do these things. Do I want to risk going to jail or losing an eye or breaking a bone? I can understand why people are afraid.
Mm-hmm.
But then what do we do? Like, we know about a thing, there's a problem, we're passionate about it, we want to help. And then we meet this wall of, okay, what do I do now? And I think a lot of people feel this. And I don't know what the answer is, but maybe you have some ideas.
It's funny, I wrote about this just this week, actually. I don't know what you can do. I don't know what people can do, because what people can do is very dependent on their context. It's dependent on their environment. It's dependent on their relationships. It's dependent on their ability. So what I would say, if for people who are still in the, like, I don't know what to do, you need to keep learning. But it's not with the intention of just learning the thing, but it's learning with the intention of being able to do something eventually. And I think that because of like the globalized homogenous system that we live in, we have become used to big ideas being global and solutions being posited as a global solution, like carbon drawdown technology or renewable energy or whatever it is, like things that can be deployed on a huge scale, things that can scale up. Like, that's what we understand solutions to be. No, that's not what solutions are. Like, a resilient system of solutions will be diverse and networked. And so what people can do depends on where they are, and where they are will fundamentally impact what they need and what their community needs. And so the only thing that I think that the global we can do is root down where we are and begin to have discussions with our neighbors and begin to ground down in the land, in the soil, and try to figure out how to make that place more resilient with regards to food security, energy security, housing, local politics, engaging in a participatory democracy process. Because essentially, like, this global system is very likely to collapse, because either it will not change enough in time and the earth will continue to revolt against us in a way that our economic systems cannot handle, or minor changes or major changes will be made. Actually, maybe say we'll have the peaceful revolution, maybe. But either way, this system that we're in right now cannot continue it probably won't see the end of this century. And so people having new systems in place, new networks of systems in place that can protect and nourish their local communities will perhaps be able to fill a vacuum in the time of collapse. So I really think that's the only thing that most people can and really should be doing. If we're all taking care of our own communities, our own backyard, and our neighbors, then we probably wouldn't be here, because we don't need that much to take care of one another. What we need as a species is actually quite simple.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. I think the focus on this kind of anarchistic, decentralized, local, community-based initiative is good. I mean, that was kind of my prompt to get into permaculture, to get into community building, to see what's going on locally around me and tend the part of the garden that I can touch. And yeah, if everybody's doing that, it feels great, right? I'm just not sure everybody's doing that. And then I look around and I say, how can we get a kind of groundswell? How can we get the kind of traction or movement that we want to see? And maybe this is the wrong question. Maybe the only thing that we can do is actually focus on what we can do and not what other people can do. But it feels like the beauty of being a human creature is that you can inspire others, you can influence others, you can work together to do really cool things that are impossible on your own. And so part of me misses this collaborative, cooperative thing where it's like, hey, let's all get together and actually clean up this beach or clean up this forest or petition to get this repealed. People need that sense of solidarity, and I feel like it's lacking generally when I look around.
I don't know. I think that's happening everywhere all the time. I think those kinds of initiatives, are happening increasingly as life becomes more economically and politically precarious for people around the world. And I agree with you that kind of like what makes Homo sapiens so remarkable is our capacity for complex dialogue. It's also what makes us victim to our own stupid idea. This is our capacity for complex dialogue. But I wonder if rather than looking to inspire, we should be looking to be inspired, because there's enough going on in most places around the world where people could just get involved. Like it would be quite unusual now, I would say, for people to be forced to kickstart a thing. Because, say, for example, like Extinction Rebellion, say there's not a local Extinction Rebellion chapter where you are, there will be one not very far, in all likelihood, that you can go and learn from and then take all of that knowledge back and build one where you are. So I think, again, it's this idea of like, if you don't want things to scale up, you want them to scale out. And if there can't be a global vision for the way that the world can be without it being brittle and fragile and resulting in huge power inequities, then we kind of have to run with the uncertainty of what it means to grant people actual autonomy, because not everybody will want to tend the garden. And that is also okay. Like, I don't want a world filled with people exactly like me. It would be very dull and it probably wouldn't run very well. Like on a, the details would be glossed over. So, and I also really like the idea of there being different pockets of things working differently and people then like sharing the knowledge of what does and doesn't work, and people experimenting differently and innovating differently, and there being different ideologies, and there being tensions as well. Tension doesn't have to be a bad thing. From tension can arise really powerful ideas. The problem with tension is when tension results in violence. And when we don't accept uncertainty and we don't accept that other people think differently from us. And we feel that that's a threat to our identity and our way of being. And so we seek to destroy before being destroyed. It's madness. So I think it's a really big challenge for humankind right now to let go of the idea of mastery and control, and the belief that, you know, that lump of gray matter in our head will be able to figure it all out. Just to, like you said, like this has to be a collaborative effort. It also has to be a collaborative effort with other species and with the natural world and with the planet itself. And that is going to have to leave room for these like oscillations of certainty and uncertainty. And I think a lot of people are willing. I think some people don't even have the time to think about it. And that has to be understood as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a kind of lack of, I think there's a pretty sincere lack of empathy. And I don't want to say on both sides, because we don't just exist in a two-sided thing, but like on all points of the sphere right now. I often think about and sometimes write about, you know, even like the villainization of certain characters, you know, executives of companies that are making bad decisions, politicians who are making bad decisions. And it's really important to not overly empower people, because most people don't have a lot of power. They are being rewarded for behaving the only way that they can within that position. And if they didn't within that position, they would be replaced. And that doesn't mean that there isn't a power inequity. Some people do have much more power than others. And once you factor in like military power and all, you know, National Guards and all that kind of stuff, it does become frightening. But there's a responsibility, I think, that needs to be held for how we want our part of the world to look. And pointing fingers at people who disagree with us and shouting about their lack of humanity, in a sense, I think reveals our own lack of humanity. And there are points in that when you come up against walls in that thought experiment, like when you think about the annihilation of the Palestinian people, my emotional response is like, there is a lack of humanity there. But there has to be some reason that it is happening. In like the Israeli cabinet's head, there has to be some reason, whether that's an emotional reason, an intellectual reason, a myriad of different reasons. I don't know. But eventually, you know, there are two courses of action. Either, you know, Israel will absolutely destroy Palestine, totally, which is looking increasingly likely, and which is a devastation and a crime. Or both sides will have to come to the table. So we must never, never forget that the best tool we have to share between us is dialogue, even if that means dialoguing with people that make you sick to your stomach. Because the moment that you see somebody as a monster, then you're dehumanizing them, and then nothing can be done. And if you think about the fact that so much violence occurs because of dehumanization.
Yes.
Or that distinction again between man and nature, the fact that, you know, that which we anthropomorphize is valued and that which isn't anthropomorphized isn't valued. I mean, I think there's nuggets in there that need to be mined.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something that I talk about a lot as well. This moment of making someone monstrous and dehumanizing them and stripping them of their dignity, and the thing that makes us sacred, divine beings. And the way that we do that to the world as well. We don't just do that to one another. We do that to the ecology. We do that to the animals, the plants, the resources, even the idea of resources, like it's something there for us to take. So yeah, I don't know what the way is to avoid that kind of thing of making someone a monster and othering them and dehumanizing them. But I think that is the seed. How does violence happen? How does it evolve and bloom? I think that's the way. Once you strip someone of their humanity, it's possible to do anything to somebody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which I think speaks to a wider, like, problematic relationship with the earth,
Yes.
right? Because it shouldn't be that even if you dehumanize somebody, you can do anything to them, because they're still a part of nature. We should have respect for nature. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, even if we fix the relationship between Homo sapiens, there's still more work to do to fix Homo sapiens' relationship to everything else.
Yes. Yes. I yes, I just finished reading David Abrams' Becoming Animal. I don't know if you've read it, but I strongly, strongly recommend it. If you haven't, I think you would love it. And in that world, somewhere when I was reading, reviews about it or something, I came across this term called ecodelic. Have you heard of this? It's
No.
it's basically the idea that psychedelics like psilocybin or LSD or plant medicines, they get us in touch with this thing that you alluded to earlier. They allow us to oscillate into this place of uncertainty, ambiguity, relationality with the earth and with the environment around us. And anytime I've ever done a psychedelic, that was one of the most striking things about doing psychedelics the first time, or any time really, that I've done a psychedelic, is that you really feel that you're so porous and you exist not as this separate encapsulated entity, but as a porous relational being where things are coming out and you're breathing in oxygen that is just this crazy thing that comes out of the ocean and intermingles with stuff coming out of trees. And it's this crazy soup that we're just breathing in, and it's invisible, so we take it for granted. But just the act of breathing on psychedelics, it can be exhilarating. There's something intoxicating about taking in this really nourishing, invisible, gaseous substance that just allows everything to happen, right? Like, so I love this idea of using psychedelics as a way to open that doorway and reconnect with nature and the world around us.
Yeah, spike the water supply. A classic, a classic trope. Probably would do everybody a lot of good. I'm a fan as well. I've done ayahuasca a couple of times, and you know, occasionally invite mushrooms into my home to have a little seance. Not a lot, just enough so that you go for a walk with the trees and you're like, oh, these are the best trees I've ever seen. Um, but yes, I agree. I think that they are a wonderful tool, but like any tool, you have to know how to use it. And there is also a huge wave of like Silicon Valley tech bros going to Burning Man and doing loads of psychedelics and talking about the sacred and talking about the divine.
Yes.
And then when you look at their actions, seemingly they have misconceptions about what those words mean, or are using the wrong definitions. So it's not it's not a silver bullet. I think people take it and they're like, no, that's not fair for me to say. I think I have seen a trend of people using them to try and like short circuit the hard work
Yes.
of actually being in relationship with the world and being accountable and responsible, and being embedded in your environment. Because like humankind, we've got this weird sort of obsession with the upstairs, with the ephemeral, with the eternal, with things that aren't material. And it's so much easier to feel like you're one with the earth when the earth is at that moment a rainbow palette magic soup, when everything feels good. Like, trying being one with everything when you're stuck in a traffic jam and
Yes.
you're late. Like, those are the moments that you actually need it. And those are also not the moments where you can do drugs.
I do.
Not when you're driving, I hope.
No, I'm kidding.
So it's a both and for me. Like, how are you using those experiences to actually deepen your perception of the magic rainbow palette when you're sober and irritated? And also, I think that's important because, contrary to the hippy dippy, divine vibe, I don't think that like spirit is the most important thing. I think the body is the most important thing. because it's through our body that we experience the world all the time. And there are clues in our language. We talk about when you want to understand something, you want to make sense of something. And that's, our senses are these physical things. And if we are if we are sacred beings, that means everything is sacred, which I think then kind of nullifies, the word sacred. But first and foremost, even in that case, then it's sacredness within a necessary temporary biological organism. And that's beautiful. And this biological organism is made up of so many different relationships. Like the human body is the most diverse ecosystem on the planet. All the stuff that's living in our gut,
Yes.
that's the most diverse ecosystem on the planet. Like, that's amazing. And so I personally love like the blood and the sweat and the tears and like the messiness of the human experience, the physicality of the human experience. I love that, like, arguably our most, or one of our most physical experiences, sex, is that which can make us see God. And I worry, I suppose, about this desire to like constantly transcend the human body, which you really sort of see as a trope. But it's not just a trope nowadays. It's been going on for a long time.
Yes.
And I think that it's grounded in misogyny. I really, really do, because it's the human body, the human female body, that births, humanity. And woman has always been more closely connected to the earth. She is described as earthy. She is the one that is not allowed inside of the temple when she's bleeding. She's the one that's not allowed inside of the golf club just because she's a woman. And, the realm of like rational thinking and the head was the realm of man. So I think that it is founded in a misogyny, which is founded in a kind of like weariness of the power of the earth and a fear of our own mortality. So yes to rainbow palette gaseous soup, but also bigger yes to rainbow palette gaseous soup experienced from the wonder that is being a biological organism.
Yes, I loved that entire rant. That's one of my favorite conversations in recent times. So thank you for saying that. And I that's a really interesting observation. I had never thought of that before, that it could be like that's beautiful. That's amazing. Thanks for giving me that, and the listeners, that to chew on. That's awesome. But yes, and everything you just said, and I saw a meme the other day that I really loved that seems to be about this, because it was a meme of like this kind of golem creature, and he's like in the earth, or in something that looks like a planet, and he's got like his four, or I don't know why I'm saying he, it's kind of androgynous, and it's got the fingers hanging up out of the earth, and it says like the universe across the golem figure, and then it says you as the little fingers that are poking through the earth, and everyone has these little bodies, and it's the universe experiencing itself. And I thought this was a really beautiful way to convey this idea that, yes, spirit, and there is this kind of schism between spirit and body, maybe because of Plato, as you said, going back to these eternal forms and all of this, which then incubated in Christianity. And we have monotheism that comes along and says that God is outside, up there in the clouds, separated from our bodies and from this earth. It's just out there somewhere. But like, what if spirit and body are unity, not a plurality? And this meme for me kind of nicely conveyed this, where I was like, yeah, we're in these little bodies, but we're really just, maybe this is the psychedelics talking, but on psychedelics, that's the feeling that I had, is that, yeah, we're all just kind of the same little energetic, spirity, godly thing, and we're just looking at each other because through this diversity, like you said, the world would be boring if it was just you or me everywhere. But this diversity is what makes it worth experiencing. And yeah.
I think it's a both and, because when I did ayahuasca the first time, it was wild. It was absolutely wild. And I won't tell the whole story, but definitely had like, the ego dissolution, the feeling of oneness. I felt like I was in the belly of the big O. That was the phrasing that came to me, like just literally in the womb. But to me, it seemed that there was a God, and God was life itself, and that life is evolving with all of us, and we are all life. We are all life. We're all of us. We are all everything. It's all life. But that doesn't mean that we can also not be us. Like we can all be life and also us. And I think that it's an important, like it's just a constant layering because like, are we the universe experiencing itself? Maybe, sure. Maybe we are life experiencing itself, but also I am still me. I still have my construct of a self. And that tree is still a tree, and that dog is still a dog, and that person is a different person. So like we can all be life experiencing itself and evolving with us, but for life to continue evolving and experiencing itself, then all of the things that life becomes have to keep on becoming and becoming and becoming. So I think it's this kind of like, rather than a binary, it's again this like duality of individualism and collectivity. So again, it's like there must be something important about the fact that we exist in biological skins. There must be something important about the fact that we are like, I'm a meat sack held together by my largest organ, and I have this thing in my head, and maybe that's where all of this is coming from. Really, who knows? But it's because of that we can do this over a piece of technology, and like, and even the fact that when we touch, like we're not actually touching things, it's just like there's this level of repulsion of electrons because technically we could all just kind of, there's an element of just sliding through one another all the time. So like that's all poetry to me. It's all total poetry. But there must be something celebrated about the life that exists within the skins of things that keep us separated from one another, but thus also facilitate our relationships with one another. And because when I was on Aya, I was like, I was so happy. I was pure ecstasy. I could die right now and just be totally fine because I would die and nothing would change. I would just be right here.
Yes.
Yeah. And there is no I, and wow. And I was just like, it was like I was in a hammock of joy. And then I was like, wait, I have a question. I have a question. Life, God, I have a question. And I was like, why, if we're all one, why are we not one big tree? Why is the planet not just one big tree? And I was like, I can figure this out. I bet I'm pretty high right now, so I'm pretty sure I can figure this out. And so we went on this like, half intellectual, half emotional journey through I don't know what. And eventually it was like, oh, okay. Life divided herself so that she could love herself. That's it. That's why we're not one big tree. We exist as separate in order to be in relationship and in order to love, in order for there to be more and more and more and more love in the world. With every new relationship, there's the capacity for more love. And that's why, I think that's why that's our big why. That's our big question mark. That's our big purpose. Like, what are we here? We're here to love each other. Fucking who cares? And also, who cares if that's not right? Because doesn't that just sound better?
Yes, I have goosebumps. You probably can't see it, but that's one of my mantras on this podcast is be good to one another. And I think part of that is maybe the next level to that is to love one another. Because that would stop so much violence. That would stop so much of all of the atrocity and ugliness that we see if we just did something that simple. I guess it's not a simple thing, though. That's the problem. Because of illusion, because of the sense of separation, because of the hyper individualistic soup that we live in, where everything is predicated on your unique needs and desires and what you can buy and what you need to do. And so it creates such a strong illusion of separation. I mean, as you said, there is also separation, but when you dwell on that separation and you lose sight of the connection and the relationality and the possibility to love, this is when it becomes pernicious and destructive.
But also, I would challenge the idea that it is simple. And I'm thinking back to a meeting I found myself in at some point last year where somebody tried to claim that, South African apartheid had ended because of love. And I was like, oh, you're joking. because love is not a feeling, love is a verb. Love is an action.
Yes.
You invite love in how you speak to people, how you treat people, how you engage with the world around you, your levels of cynicism, mistrust sometimes, and also sometimes cynicism and mistrust are important as well. There's a reason that we have the skin barrier. You can't just glide through, being a being of osmosis, although that won't be good for you either. You will be infected and you will die. So it's love is hard, not in the sense that it takes a lot of work, but it's hard in the sense that it takes discipline.
Yes.
And especially in a corrupted system.
Yes.
Especially. But then the more that you do it, the easier that it gets. I had this amazing, I called up my friend the other day and I was like, dude, trust. It's so easy. Why did nobody told? Like, if somebody told me it was easy, I'd have done it earlier in my life. Because I just had this sense of like letting go and being really sort of like unconditionally trusting, which is essentially what trusting is. And found that all of a sudden, I just had that very bodily experience of, oh my God, this is so much easier than keeping my defenses up all the time. This takes so much less effort. So there you go. Love, trust, all of the good things. They're hard because they take discipline. But once you begin to implement them, they are effortless in a way that maintaining more barriers, space, boundaries between yourself and the world is.
Yes. Like surrender and resistance on a psychedelic. Another very important verb, and something that's very felt in the body. And it's very difficult to surrender at first, but as you've just described, once you can do this, it's actually easier to surrender because it requires so much resistance to resist.
Yeah, exactly. Which
brings me to a point, because we're talking about life a lot. We're talking about love. We're talking about poetry, beauty, the body, all of the messiness, the individual versus the collective, all great topics that I love talking about. And there's one that I think is looming and that kind of ties all of these together. And that's death, because our body decays and dies. Like it's this kind of interwoven thing, right? Life is death and death is life. And if we stepped back from our human vantage points, we would see just this constant psychedelic kind of shape-shifting and blooming and madness, seemingly chaotic, beautiful madness happening all around us, where things are coming and going and passing through and going. And to me, death is one of those things that's hard to surrender to. There's so much clinging because of this subjectivity and this relationality and this sense of, I'm here to learn and I have love to give and I have people to meet and conversations to have and there's so much to do, and if I die, all of that ends for me, but I experience the world as me. So what do I do when there's no more me? And death is this very scary, hard thing that I think once we encounter it, changes us forever. Like I remember when my first encounter with death was, I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and my grandfather committed suicide. And he was like my dad, because my dad is kind of a crazy outlaw biker guy who wasn't around much. So it was me and my grandfather. And then when that happened, I remember distinctly, like, the me that I was before that and the me that I was after that, totally different people. Like, death teaches us that there's something very like sacred and important about life, but then we fear it for our whole lives. And it's this really weird, paradoxical thing that I think if we actually developed a healthier relationship with death, there would be something more beautiful about life.
Well, first of all, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That is a real tragedy. Thank you for sharing it. And I agree with you. I think that, a huge part of what we're running from is our own mortality. I think that's why people build really tall buildings and put their names on them. I think it's why sometimes it's why people write books and put the names on the spines, or music and put the name. It's a lot of names on things that will outlast biological, bodies. There's also been some really interesting research done by Sheldon Solomon and his team to show how death anxiety, this fear of death, impacts our politics. We become more right wing in moments when faced with death, essentially, and they've done amazing work tying that into the Anthropocene and the climate crisis and the political responses to it. So I agree. And I don't really know what the solution is to that. I think that there are cultures that are much better attuned to the inevitability of death and are much better at celebrating death. Even the way that we rush through, certainly in the West. And when I say West, even that is too broad. I mean, probably particularly Anglophone cultures, the way that we rush through funerals and rites, and it's, the industry is privatized. It's somebody else that deals with the body. And this idea that when somebody's gone, they're gone, rather than, well, they're not in that anymore, but they're in you, and everything that they taught you is in you, and thus they live on. So I would love to see us as us Anglophones or Westerners or global Northians. It's a bit Martian, doesn't it? Global Northers accept our own mortality, and I think there's beauty in it. I go through different waves with it. I think for the first year plus after my first ayahuasca experience, I was like, anytime, I'm ready. I'm good. I've seen the other side. I'm happy. So it's all good. And then I fell in love, and I was like, not yet, please. I'm having too good a time. You can't take this from me yet. I don't want this to go. And I don't want to leave behind the person that I love. And I really don't want them to go away. And, because those first instances of falling in love are like, the level of kind of, how do I put this? Selfishness almost, as you turn away from the entire rest of the world and towards, this wonderful person for a time. It's kind of like the megalomania of children almost. And it's beautiful, and it should itself be celebrated because it's only a temporary expression, and it will, develop and mature into something else. So I definitely go through cycles with my own relationship to death. I think, how do I put this? The idea of a threat on the lives of those I love is much more frightening than a threat on my own life. Because once you're gone, you're gone. But still, what am I trying to say? What do I want to say? Is it true? Yeah, no, I think right now I'm in a moment of, you keep that scythe well away from me, pal. So maybe I'm just fluffing here. It's hard when life is really beautiful. It's hard to be like, sure, one day it'll go and I'm really fine with that, because you just want more of the good thing.
Yes. Yeah, this is the human conundrum. I mean, maybe it's not even a human conundrum. I wonder if animals wrestle with their mortality. I remember I read an interesting article some time ago that tried to answer this question, that said, are they aware of death and what it is? And I never thought of that was a question. I thought, of course they know. But then this article was saying basically that it's unclear. It seems that some animals have elaborate rituals around death, like crows and ravens. And if you watch apes or monkeys, elephants, that their behavior changes, and they do seem to show like reverence or some kind of awareness, at least, that something has changed irreversibly. But I wonder what that. Sorry, I thought that somebody was trying to get into the car for a second. I wonder what that experience is like for animals. Is it just us that have this fear, or is it every living creature? Does a plant have it?
Well, it depends on the threat, right? So, if on one end of a network of plants, a fire is started, they will send signals of warning essentially down that network. And I imagine that they send those signals of warning because there is a receptor for those hormones that can translate that into danger, threat to existence. Whether or not we can anthropomorphize that as a fear of death itself, I don't know. And I suppose then it begs the question of like, how much of us sit and worry about death because we're surrounded by death, or surrounded by violence, or because living in this world is in so many ways a threat to our own existence all the time, whether that's a threat to our mental health, our community's health, the planet's health, our physical health, our sexual health. Like, it's pretty weird being alive in a system built upon death and violence and exploitation and extraction. It's a strange thing. So perhaps there is a connection there. I don't know. I also don't know how important all of this is, in a sense. Like, we can theorize until the cows come home, but I'm really interested in like, how do we make life better for living beings in a way that they want life to be better, which will demand also them being able to make decisions, and will also demand us being representatives for beings that don't have like complex language. That seems like a really exciting use of Homo sapien brain power.
Yes.
And emotionality. That seems really, really, really exciting. I think I'm kind of over a lot of like the philosophical questions that have come down the line from like men with, old privileged men with, long Greek beards. Like, who cares? Who cares? They all died. We all die. Who cares? That's glib. I'm sorry, but this is, we're in an emergency. let's get our priorities straight.
Yeah. We are in an emergency, and that's the thing. It feels like I know we're about at time now, so there's not time for this story. But the sometimes when there is an emergency or there's something really pressing that happens, action is more important than thought. And I think that time is now. Like there needs to be more action and feeling and using the body as a kind of instrument, because it's the only instrument that we have. It's the one that we know best. And using it to sense that something is wrong. Maybe this anxiety and these feelings and these stressors and the feeling of something not being right. It's not weird to feel these things.
Yeah, maybe it's right.
Yeah.
Maybe our body has some sense about it.
Exactly. So I'm with you, and I'm happy that you said that, and I really believe the same. And I think more of us are so disconnected from our bodies that we would just rather take some pills to medicate us. Are you feeling anxious? Go to the therapist. They'll give you some pills, and you won't feel anxious anymore. And it's just, is that the solution, or is it sitting with these emotions, working through them, feeling them, and letting them spur us to action?
I don't know. I think for some people the pills will be the correct thing. I think for others it will be action. I think for others it will be sitting and feeling. I know that things that make me feel better are doing things about the things that upset me, doing something about the things that upset me. But I also know that that is not the course of action that is for everyone. Like, some people are meant to be how do I put this?
It's kind of your closing thought, I think. So you could take your time and
imagine we all live in one big house, right? And there's some of us that like to leave the house, and go down to the end of the garden and point at the broken fence and be like, right, that is broken. Who's going to do something about it? I can maybe try and do something about it. Does somebody else know how to do something better about it? While we're here, can we design it better? Like, there'll be a bunch of people that are obsessed with that broken fence because that's an immediate thing that needs fixed. The people like me who like to go off and do that are fundamentally dependent on the people that are like, I don't really care about whether or not the fence is broken, or rather, I trust that other people are fixing the fence. I really want to feed those people when they come home. I really want to get my fingers in the soil and pull out the roots and make dinner for everybody. That's what I want to do. And then there'll be somebody else that will be, in the attic looking out the window being like, I need to document that. That fence building thing, that's the best way we've ever, fixed that fence. I'm gonna write about that. I'm gonna take some photographs about it. And then there'll be other people that are, making sure that the kids don't fall into the stream because the fence is broken. And, so it's like we all exist together to make the world. And there has to be a diversity of how we respond to the world, because that's what makes the world beautiful. And how to be in the world in a way that works for you is something that is going to be dependent on the individual. There are some key things about, like access to community, a purpose, there's some like really key general themes that are very, very important, but what that actually looks to you is up to you. And I think that's why like the learning in order to learn to do something is important, because it's not just like, how do I fix the big bad world? It's how do I fix feeling bad in the big bad world? Like, what do I need to do for me in the big bad world? And how do I figure out how to do the thing for me in the big bad world that will then have a ripple out effect for other people in this big bad world? And then maybe we'll start to see a little slice of the good little world around the corner. So that's what I think. I think that we're all the same and we're all different. And that's what makes this incredibly complex challenge almost impossible to solve, but also deeply, deeply beautiful a challenge as well.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. I think that's a brilliant place to end. That's beautiful, and I couldn't have said it better. Strongly agree. So thank you for passing through. Thank you for sharing all of these ideas and thoughts and feelings and experiences. And yeah, can you tell people where they can find you before you head out?
Sure. You can find me at planetcritical.com, where I have my own podcast and a newsletter and links to, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever you want to find there. But planetcritical.com, sign up and I'll see you there. Thank you so much for having me, Danny. This was lovely.